Are you truly stepping into the role of leader in your own life the way you know you're meant to? What shifts would unlock your full potential? It's time to explore those answers with the host of Sacred Leadership, intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander.
Welcome to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse here on the Inspired Choices Network. My name, of course, is Sherisse Alexander, and in today's episode, I'll be sharing some quiet and often invisible ways that women can overfunction in their relationship and how overgiving can become a survival strategy in the endless search for love. Today, I'm going to be sharing my own journey through marriage, divorce, betrayal, and profound self-return. I unpack how emotional hypervigilance, over-responsibility, and self-erasure often masquerades as love, especially for strong, capable, emotionally attuned women. Through modern grounded reframe of the ideas popularized by Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, today I'll be exploring how men and women often regulate stress, connection, and intimacy differently, and how misunderstanding these differences can lead women to do more, give more, and disappear in the process. So this episode today is a few days after Valentine's Day, and instead of talking about relationships and how to find love and all of these things, I wanted to share my own experience of really finding my way back to the most important relationship all of us have, and that is ultimately with ourselves. So allow me to begin going way back in time to, my first experience with that deep love. And I was super young when I got married. I think I was about 21, which is a baby by today's standards. But what I remember about that time and getting married, my then husband and I had been already living together for like 5 years and really doing a lot of adulting. We already had one child. We were living on our own. We were, working jobs and doing the adult thing. And what I remember the day that when we were getting married is, everybody's got their advice, don't go to bed angry, keep communicating, all of these things. And with all of the wisdom of a 22-year-old, I remember feeling very much like, we got this. We've been doing this for 5 whole years. We got it. Sure, there'll be tough times, but we'll manage. It's funny because I learned real quick that even though we were adulting, there's something that really happens. At least it happened in my experience. And allow me to preface this all by saying that this is all just from the perspective of my experience and my observations. But, very shortly after getting married, I remember observing like these really subtle shifts. And it made zero sense to me. And maybe part of the problem is that, remember, I was 22. I was living my best life, but being married while doing it. So I didn't understand in my head why all these things needed to change because I was getting married. Like, what do you mean I can't have sleepovers with my girlfriends? Like, we're not allowed to do that anymore. And so these were some of the shifts that I needed to at least have an awareness of, and I certainly didn't have the emotional intelligence or the communication skills to be able to hear what my partner was saying while still honoring what it was that I needed. I remember very much, and if there are any young people that are listening to this, I remember very much embodying this real overconfidence, this arrogance that young people can sometimes have, because I remember very much approaching many situations in that very early relationship that were kind of like, I'm going to do whatever I want kind of thing. Like, you can't tell me what to do. And a healthy dose of that is good, but how do we turn that into maybe softer language so we don't lose the energy of it, but it lands a little bit better? So today, while we're going through this, I hope what I can illustrate is how over the years, I was gradually giving up bits and pieces of myself in an effort to hold on to love and sustain love and to keep it as close to me as possible. And the one thing that I realized as I was reflecting is that as much as I was loving those around me, I was loving them with the intention of receiving love in return. So that was the very beginning of my experience with love, was this first marriage. And of course, as I was going through it, what I began to find happening, because the message that I was receiving back from my partner, initially when we got married, it was very much of like, okay, well, I'm going to do what I want to do. But then it started to morph into this energy of like, well, how do I love him so that he's happy? How do I love him so that he loves me the way I need to be loved? How can I bend and contort myself even more and give up bits and pieces of myself so that this person can soften and love me in the way that I need to? It was, and again, you don't realize these things when you're in the moment of it. So I guess I would pause here and pose the question to whoever's listening right now. Do you find yourself in a relationship, and it doesn't need to be romantic, it can certainly be familial, where you are bending and contorting and doing all of the things, all of the performative things to meet someone where they are, but in the process of doing that, you are losing bits and pieces of yourself, and even perhaps relinquishing and relaxing boundaries that are important and integral to who you are and what it is that you need. So those awarenesses, of course, rarely come, like I said, in that moment. I didn't quite know the difference between capability and responsibility. I didn't know the difference yet between generosity and overextension. I didn't quite understand the difference yet, what it was to love versus trying to manage somebody. And when I was thinking about, what are the real reasons that I'm doing this? And for me, a lot of the healing opportunities that I've experienced almost always go back to childhood. And when you start thinking about it, I'm a first generation Canadian. My parents came from the Caribbean. For anybody who is familiar with the Caribbean, there's all kinds of memes and reels about Caribbean parents, and I love my parents dearly. So if you are listening, Mom and Dad, please do not think otherwise. But it's tough love. It's really, really tough love when you grow up, and I think most ethnic children would understand that statement, that it's really, really tough love. It's the energy of spare the rod, spoil the child. And I remember around 21 years old. So my Anthony would have been 1 year old at that point in time, 1 or 2 years old. And I remember having a conversation with my mom, and I was just like, do you even love me? And she was really taken aback by this question, like, what are you talking about? Of course. Now, the importance of that question is to be 21 years old and not even being able to recognize what love looks like to you. And the reason why I bring this back is that all of these coping mechanisms that I had taken on in almost all of my relationships were this energy of, if I'm needed, then I won't be left. If I make myself invaluable, then this person will need me. And if I'm needed, then that must mean that it's love. And if I am constantly scanning and constantly worrying about what is good for the other person, then I won't be surprised. I'll be able to anticipate their needs and constantly be there to fill those needs. If I take on their emotional weight and become their emotional punching bag, then I'll be able to hold this relationship together. And I think if we're really honest as women, we are naturally wired for this. And I think that it is, again, this is from my perspective, and I think that that comes from that instinctive part of ourselves where we are nurturers. It is the nature, generally speaking, of women to nurture. And sometimes I think that we mistake that nurturing we take that nurturing and turn it into overfunctioning, and it then, we say, becomes an expression of love. But at what expense? That's the question. If you're honest, is love supposed to feel like this constant work, right? I'm not saying that relationships don't have challenges. They inherently will. That's the nature of relationships, but does it need to feel so exhausting and draining? And one thing that I like to remind myself of is that, there's giving from your cup and then there's giving from your overflow. And this is where it becomes really important to remember that we are not we should generally be giving from our overflow as opposed to from our cup. And I think that that's what I was trying to articulate all those years ago, in the very early stages of my marriage, was to say, listen, I want to love you and I want to give you what you want, but at the same time, my cup's not full right now, and I need to worry about my cup before I can worry about yours. And I just didn't have the language. I didn't know, and as young women will think, like, he should know what I mean. He should absolutely be able to read my mind. And I now listen to my 21-year-old daughter. So funny. And I see so many parts of myself in her and in how she responds to relationships. And I find it comical. And instead, I find myself saying very little and allowing her to come to these realizations on her own, which is the hardest part as a parent, especially when she's full of fire. She's very fiery and very passionate. So if there are any young women that are listening to this, or you're an older lady with all this young energy in you, the one thing that I've learned is there's nothing wrong with that energy, but it's in the way that we communicate this to the receiving party that we sometimes need to temper so it lands and actually sits with the person versus just water off a duck's back. So as I moved through this relationship, inevitably what happened is that I was giving more and more and more of myself and putting up my own walls. So it was funny, when I see the visual of this, it's like this outpouring of love and giving and consideration and how can I make you happy? And at the same time, feeling very much, now I'm sure my ex would have his own narrative around this, but I'm just obviously sharing the story from my experience. But the visual I have is, so while I'm giving all of this stuff out, this energy out, I'm literally putting this wall up around myself and toughening my skin so that even though I'm not getting back what I need in this experience, I'm thickening my skin so that it doesn't hurt as much. So it's like I'm putting myself in this fortress so that I'm not feeling the fact that I'm still not getting what I need. And I think that we often do this in relationship, again, romantic or familial or friendship or whatever the case may be. We're giving and giving and giving with this expectation that we're going to get something in return. And if we're giving with the expectation of getting something in return, then that's not genuine giving at all. If anything, I think you get the exact opposite of what you want or what you desire, because it's almost like you're not even giving from a real and genuine place. We think we are, but the question again that I would pose here is, the next time you are giving of yourself, is that coming from a deep, genuine place, or are you giving with the expectation of receiving? And this happens in all kinds of scenarios. And I think the easiest way to test this theory is if you do something and you feel miffed or upset because somebody didn't do something in return. And that's the easiest test of if you're giving from a genuine place. If you give to somebody and you could care less if you get something back in response, a gift in return, a reciprocal I love you, any of those things, then I think that that is your number one indicator that you were not giving genuinely. You were giving from a place of expectation. So the question is, why? Why would we put ourselves in that position? Why not take that energy that we are putting outwards with an expectation and turn that inwards and give to ourselves first and foremost? And throughout the course of not only that particular relationship, but many different relationships, I began to see how sensitive I was. So even though it was really interesting, so even though I was doing all this giving and putting up this wall, I was also at the same time still trying to be, well, still was energetically sensitive and really hypervigilant. So in other words, I was constantly scanning and looking and trying to intuit into the spoken and the unspoken cues, and what does it mean, and reading shifts and reading tones and reading silences. And I'm sure that you can see by now that this is all extremely exhausting. But before I continue, we are going to go ahead and take our first break. I will be right back, where I continue to talk about energetic sensitivity and hypervigilance on today's episode. We'll be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse at pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to today's episode, Women Who Overfunction and Loving Yourself, or How to Love Yourself Wholly. So today what I'm talking about, or what I'm sharing, is my own experience over the years from young love through adult years, and in each of those, or in all of those experiences, or all those relationships, how I was giving away bits and pieces of myself slowly over time and not really realizing it until many, many years later. So right before the end of the last segment, I was just covering how I was functioning, or how I learned to function. And this was coming from a place of really not feeling safe or secure in any relationships, not romantic ones, not familial ones, not friendships, because I was constantly scanning and looking and reading into tones, body language, energy, all the things, trying to understand what my place was in these relationships. And that becomes really exhausting in any relationship. And it tries, I think that when we do that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a sense of control within that. But obviously we can't control anything or anyone that's outside of ourselves. So needless to say, that's not necessarily something that's sustainable for the long term, as much as we might try. And as I proceeded or continued my experience through my marriage, I remember that once the relationship started to dissolve and I was on the other side of that, I definitely remember feeling like, oh, okay, finally, now I can find a relationship where I can find someone who gets me, who understands me. And lo and behold, I move into another relationship. And interestingly enough, I found myself doing the same thing again. Shocker, where I'm trying to manage this other person, and I'm trying to, control situations and control narratives and manage their feelings, and really, again, overperforming, right? How do I make him happy? How do I love him enough? How do I meet all of the things on his list and be perfect? How do I be enough for this person? And I remember just kind of being like, okay. I mean, I don't even think that I really fully was aware that I was doing this quite yet. Um, and until maybe a few years later when I was like, how am I doing this again? How is this a thing? And I would say that I was probably maybe about 3 or 4 years into that relationship when I realized, okay, I'm doing this thing again. And that is when I really started to turn that energy in towards myself and really start to begin to peel back the layers of myself that were the parts of myself that were asking me to show up in these that were really, they were defense mechanisms. They were control mechanisms. They were all the ways that I was showing up so that I could feel safe and in control. And again, this goes all the way back to childhood and not feeling like enough. And that is the story that was like playing over and over and over again in my head. And so I think that the real turning point for me, um, and I think most of you know, it wasn't the breakdown of a relationship. In some ways it was. And what I mean when I say that is like the breakdown of the marriage. In some ways it certainly was the beginning to be a turning point for me in this journey. But I think that the even bigger turning point for me was when there's betrayal. And when you are someone who is showing up and doing the work and, doing therapy and going to coaching and doing this thing and reading self-help books and just you're doing the most. And then there is this betrayal. And betrayal, before you assume that it's what you think it is, betrayal shows up in many different ways in relationships. But when there is betrayal, then it really forces you to question all those ways and all the things that you were doing. And I think most people, when there is any type of betrayal, the first thing that we do is we blame the other person, what this other person did, etc., etc. I elected to go the other way, and not necessarily in a positive way either. It was all the I'm not enough. We are already doing all these things to be enough. And when I say we, I mean me. I was already doing all of these things to be enough. But then I was now all of a sudden not enough. Not smart enough, not pretty enough, didn't work hard enough, didn't love enough, wasn't funny enough, wasn't all the things enough. And that's a ick road to go down. There's no other way to put it. But I let myself. I fully let myself. And eventually I got to a place in space where I was able to accept that I really am somebody who honestly, genuinely believes that my outer world is a full reflection of what is going on inside of me. And I don't even think that I fully had this awareness or that I could really articulate it. But even as I've been reflecting back on that particular time, I realized that, when people say I was seeing all the ways in my life that my true belief of my own personal value was really being reflected back at me in almost every single relationship. And so the question I often pose to people is when we're unhappy with the things that are going on in our exterior world, what is being shown to you for you to address? And I think even now, as I think back to there was resistance at some point about even accepting responsibility. And I don't mean accepting responsibility in terms of it's my fault this thing happened, but I can see now the responsibility that I can take for all the ways that I wasn't loving myself for that to actually show up in my experience. And loving myself not in a surface way. This is way beyond that because I was loving myself really well in a surface way. But when I say in a deep, meaningful way, what I'm talking about are the quiet stories that we tell ourselves, the quiet beliefs that we hold about ourselves. And there's this word that one of my coaches would use, and I absolutely love the word, but it's insidious, because it gives this energy of like quiet and secretive and sneaky and all of these things. And I use that word here because it's not even in your conscious awareness. So right now, all these years later, after all of these things have happened, I am now finally able to look back and fully see all of the ways that I wasn't loving myself, wasn't valuing myself in the insidious ways, not in the obvious ways, in the quiet ways that only I would know. There's obviously all the ways that we see these things manifest for people, and we're able to sit and make judgment and so on and so forth. Yes, there's all of that. But I'm talking about in the ways that nobody except you will know how you are not loving yourself and not valuing yourself. And so it's such a personal journey. And so once I began to see that it didn't matter how much love and affection and attention and all of these things that I was outwardly putting in any of my relationships, it was never going to be enough to give me. So this is what I mean when I say that idea around still loving to receive. This was still happening, but in a very different way. And this is the thing about this journey. The deeper you go, it's kind of like that Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole. The deeper you go, the deeper it goes, the deeper you have to be willing to go in order to like unearth these things and bring them to the surface, because that energy of loving to be loved was still there. It had just morphed into something else. It had morphed because I had, of course, become more independent after the divorce. So of course it shows up in a different way. It's like now testing me in a different way. Like, are you really learning the lessons? And I had learned after, the experience of going through a revelation of betrayal, I learned, no, I hadn't quite learned the lesson, or not fully. So I then really took all of that energy that I was putting outwards and really fully beamed it towards myself, like full force, really just had begun to love on myself in a way that I don't think that I had ever loved before. But before I go into what that looks like, I feel like it's important to also talk about a book that I had read, two books that I read that I felt were really important in understanding the way that men and women can show up in relationship and how I had so grossly misunderstood. And those books are Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. They are not new books. They're old. I think they're maybe 25, 30 years old, if you can believe that. And one of the things that the author talks about, so he has two books. The most recent version is like an updated version based on new dating styles and the introduction, or more topics around the different genders, having different energies, even though maybe not, being born as a female, but presenting as male, those kinds of things. So he's updated his editions so that he can allow for this type of conversation to emerge. But in the first book, he talks so much about what men and women look for in relationship. And now I see. So one thing that I'd always misunderstood in relationship is that when men are under stress, they do their whole cave thing. They go really quiet. They become really introspective. And as women, it is perfectly natural for us to like want to seek assurance, reassurance, and make sure that everything is okay. And I can even remember when I was married, like I would say that to my then husband. I would say things like, is everything okay? Like, and that was the energy. Like, is everything okay? Like, are we okay? Like this real desperate, overperforming kind of energy, this anxious attachment energy is what I really was showing. And he was grappling with his own thing, and whether or not he knew what that thing was is neither here nor there. But I certainly didn't have the emotional awareness or intelligence at that point in time to even be aware enough to say, oh, okay, well, he's going through his own thing and he might not even know what that thing is at this point in time. I'm just going to take a step back and give him some space. I'm going to love him, but I'm going to leave him. And I'm going to not leave, but I'm going to give him the space to process in the way that he needs to process. And so there was always this energy that I was giving and this resistance energy that he was giving. And I never understood it literally until I read this book. And I remember once the light went on, I was like, oh, is that what they're doing? I would tell you, I learned so many things from that book. But anyways, I will continue with some of the lessons that I want to share with you right after this break. We'll be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse on the Inspired Choices Network today, where I am talking about women who overfunction and how we can love ourselves without losing ourselves. In the first segments, I was talking or resharing, my journey through a marriage and the end of that marriage and moving into relationships and moving into a new relationship and realizing that I was still giving from my empty cup as opposed to giving from my overflow. And right before we went to break, I was just about to highlight some of the things that I had learned or the very juicy lessons that really resonated with me after reading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And one of those, of course, was, there's obviously communication style, but the biggest one for me is how men and women respond differently when under stress and duress. And I don't want to say that that's like across the board because nothing is an absolute, but I had definitely and continue to witness that when my significant other is under stress, his inclination is to go quiet. And my inclination is to reach out and make sure that everything is okay. But I think that the growth and the emotional maturity and awareness that has come now is like after this last couple of years, what I would say has happened is there's this new emotional maturity where I have really begun, because I took all of that love that I was putting outside and really focused it inwards. I would say that there's just kind of this new emotional maturity that is like just confident. And, things happen in life and I can't control anyone else, but just trusting that if and when my partner is ready to talk, they will find their way to me. And if there is something that really needs to have a conversation, then I will pick a moment when that is appropriate so that we can go through that. But not, the other thing is that I didn't necessarily feel that every single feeling that I was having, every single thing I was going through. And I think that in some ways that was one of the things that I was trying to do, is I was really trying to take all of my emotional stuff and dump it on my partner and make them responsible for it. That's the difference between 20-year-old Sherisse and 40 plus Sherisse, is that I was always making the other person responsible for why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. And that shift or that evolution eventually got to where I could say to my partner, because, when they could pick up when something was wrong, he might say to me, are you okay? And I would say, no, I'm fine. And, if I can read energy, so can he. We all have that gift. And he would follow up with, are you sure? And I would then say, you know what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to figure out if my shit belongs on your doorstep or if it's really for me to process. And that's one of the shifts that I'm talking about, is not making all of my feelings his responsibility, even though he wanted to. And I loved him for that. And I would say, I really love that you want to make this your responsibility. And I thank you. I love that. But my feelings are my responsibility. It's my hygiene, of my emotional hygiene, that I need to manage. So, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I'm not going to go through the whole book here. I just wanted to share that one really juicy lesson, and how I turned he doesn't care to he's processing in his own way, or these different communication styles that show up. I've learned how to take that, and instead of making it about me, which is inevitably what I was doing, it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with him, and making him ultimately. So as much as I wanted to be responsible for my own emotional hygiene, learning how to make him responsible for his own emotional hygiene. He's an adult. And to try and take that away from him and manage that like he's a 3-year-old it's in my opinion, it's disrespectful. It's like saying, I don't trust you enough to take care of your own emotions. We're all old enough. Coming to the place where he can be able to do that is his responsibility to do, not mine. So I want to come back to that other big shift, which was after betrayal and what showed up. So of course there was the am I good enough? All the am I enoughs. But then I found myself going into this hyperactivity of overperforming. So if I thought I was doing it before, I then go into this hypervigilance of like this real ridiculous hyperactivity of like just overdoing it, over just all the things. So, if we make this about, cooking 3 times a week, now it's like I'm taking care of 14 meals. I'm just using it as an example. That's not what happened. If I'm having sex 3 times a week, well, now we're having sex 3 times a day kind of thing, right? So you can see that this is just lunacy, and just you can't even keep up with that type of activity, right? Like if you're just being normal hyperactive, well, this went to just levels that were just not sustainable. And eventually I realized like this is just not even, I can't do this. This is just an outpouring of energy that is not good for anybody, and it's not sustainable. It's not good for me because I'm exhausted, and it's not good for the other person because what am I telling them? I don't even know what the messages are in that. I'm sure I could break them down if I really chose to, but I don't even care. I think the point is that the idea was is if I become exceptional enough, then I will finally be safe. So, and that just is not the truth. It's the furthest thing from the truth. And so the last couple of years have really been around me taking all of that juicy energy that I was pouring outwards and pouring it into myself. But here's the beautiful thing about that. I didn't do it in a way that was like, I got to tell you, I don't take these moments very often, but I'm going to take this moment. I think of how I showed up in those moments, and as hurt as I was, I still had so much love for this person, so much. So I could still show up and have like deep, meaningful conversations and still hold space for my own hurt, but also hold space to hear what they were going through and what they were grappling with. And even as I'm like recounting it now, I'm feeling all of that emotion right now, because the reality is it's like everybody's got to handle their thing in their own way. But for me, it was so therapeutic, and I think that it was part of the healing process for me, is being able to like hold and honor the fact that I held so much love for this person, continue to hold so much love for this person, but I was still able to hold so much love for myself, honor my own hurt, honor my own pain, and not even direct it at him in a way that was like full of anger and bitterness and just venom. And I think that as humans, that's generally speaking what we do when we're hurt. If you look around, and it's often a question that I ask myself, and some people think when they hear me saying it that I'm saying it in a way that's meant to be funny or dismissive or flippant. But when I see somebody acting in a way that is just like so shocking to me, the first question I actually ask myself is, I wonder who hurt them. And I think that if we ask that question more, it softens us to realize that everybody, and we hear this all the time. I mean, we're all walking around with our own wounds. Some are obvious and some are not so obvious. But I think that that's what this experience really, this whole life journey really, because I'm somebody who really tries to meet people heart open. But I think that what this whole experience has been asking me and asking others to do is, how can we experience pain and betrayal and hurt and still show up heart-centered and willing to still show love to other people. And I'm not going to lie, it's hard. It takes practice. But at the end of the day, I think that I continue to do this. And in the moments when I don't feel like I can, I still can take a step back and love myself and give myself what I need so I can continue to go out and show love in the world, not just to the people who are in my experience, but the people, the stranger on the street, or the people that I'm meeting for the first time, my kids, my family, my significant other, all of these things. So this was the beginning of how to love myself without losing myself. And these are going to sound like really obvious things, when I talk about how to move into this energy and move into this space. But I really started doing the things that brought me joy. And I can't come back to that enough. And I remember as I was moving through this, my heart was so heavy with grief. It was literally there. It felt like it was there all the time. But I was still able to like go out into the day and laugh and find the moments that like brought me joy, and I could like live in that. And I remember those experiences so very clearly. And I remember even thinking to myself like, wow, even though I'm like super hurt right now and I'm feeling all this heaviness in my chest, I'm still really having a good time. And I think that that's probably one of the greatest gifts of the experience, is knowing that you can go through something so heavy and so painful, but at the same time know that you can go out into your day. And I think sometimes it's just asking. If you're somebody who's spiritual or religious, I think that I would just ask. And the prayer was real simple. It was like, show me love today. Show me love today. And I don't even know if I was asking for love to be shown to me and on me, but then inevitably I would get an experience that would show me love. And one that comes to mind on one of these days that I asked, where I was like, I was almost like the plea was reinstill my faith and love. And I would be out on the street doing my own thing, minding my own business. And I would see a couple that was like holding hands or, just being really intimate in public. And I don't say it in a way like this is something that's shocking, but I was seeing a display of, not a public display of affection, a public display of intimacy. And it warmed my heart and it lightened my heart. And it was like, when those moments happen, I'm just like, thank you for showing me that. On this day when I might be feeling all of this heaviness, thank you for showing me this intimacy. So if you are at a place in your life where you need to be reminded of what love looks like and what love feels like. Ask for it and be open to the very many ways that that shows up in your life. And as I continue to move through healing and learning, and let me say very clearly, healing is not linear. It is, I don't want to say it's a lifelong thing, but I do actually think that it is a lifelong thing, because I still find now that things that happen many, many moons ago still rear their ugly head in ways that I can't anticipate. But before I talk about moving in fully to that place and space of loving myself and healing myself and directing all of that energy, we are going to go to our break. We'll be right back.
Leadership isn't reserved for CEOs or world leaders. It's something each of us is called to embody in our own lives. But how do you awaken that inner leader with clarity and confidence? On Sacred Leadership with intuitive business coach Sherisse Alexander, you'll discover powerful tools and spiritual insights to align your words, actions, and outcomes. Tune in every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific, right here on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is Sacred Leadership with Sherisse Alexander. To participate in the program, join the live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also send an email to Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. Now back to the program.
Welcome back to Sacred Leadership with Sherisse here on the Inspired Choices Network. Thank you, as always, for joining me week after week. If you are enjoying the content that I am bringing here every Wednesday, please find me go to your favorite platform and give me a 5-star review. And if you have any questions, comments, or if you'd love to be a guest, please reach out to me at Sherisse@pavitraleadership.com. That's SHERISSE at PAVITRA leadership.com. So on today's episode, I've been talking about women who overfunction and how we can move into loving ourselves without losing ourselves. And throughout the course of today's episode, I've been sharing some very intimate moments about my experience over the years in romantic relationships, as well as, friendships and the like, where I have lost myself, where I have overgiven, overperformed in an effort to create security in love, in an effort to create security really for myself. And the most recent awareness or understanding that I've come to is that all of that energy that I was putting outwards, the first place that it needed to go was inwards. And that I was finally able to begin seeing how the way that the stories that I was telling myself deep inside, and again, this is so personal, the stories that I was telling myself, how they were really, really manifesting themselves in my exterior world. And it doesn't have to be your belief pattern. I'm sharing what I have found to be true for myself, which is it was there on full frontal. So instead of being able to blame, my partner for how they were behaving or what they were doing, I can see, from a spiritual sense, when I look at it, that they were showing up exactly how they needed to so that I could begin to do the work that I needed to. And some people might look at that and say, that's just hogwash so that you can explain away bad behavior. Maybe, but it certainly forced me to begin to love myself in a way and to be, as I'd said in the last segment, loving myself, but not from a place of bitterness, not from a place of anger. And to the friend who would tell me that I wear these rosy colored glasses, yes, I continue to wear rosy colored glasses when it comes to love and humanity and all the things that we can do if we choose to begin to heal the wounds that we sit with. Then I still continue to believe in the spirit and the beauty of humanity and what we can do when we put those rosy colored love goggles on. So But as I continued to walk on this healing journey, I gave myself space first and foremost. I honored that, and I honored it without apology. I wrapped myself in the love and affection of the connections that felt safe, that felt secure, that I felt I could trust. I journaled a lot. I threw myself into lots of different activities and this is where again I pat myself on the back because I didn't do it in a way that was actually destructive to anybody. If anything, I used all of that hurt and that pain directed in towards myself and really put that energy into things that were very creative and very healing and very therapeutic. Lots of creative endeavors, which I really, really enjoyed. But then I went on this almost like this tour of like, what do I want to do? And the whole time still showing up and being there in space and in time and reality for, my significant other, because it was still a relationship that was important to me. It was still a relationship that I wanted. It was still a relationship, still is a relationship that I want and have and will continue to foster and put energy and love into, because it has when I was able to take a step back and detach from the emotion of the scenario, I think the gifts of what I have gotten far significantly outweigh, the pain and the suffering and the things that go back that had gone with the experience. And when you start to do this, tally, this sheet, pros and cons, when you go through something like this, again, very personal, nobody else can do it for you. And I was able to see that there were so many juicy things that I've gotten, not even just from him and what he was able to like bring to my life in a very physical sense, but all the other things. And the list is just so long and so plentiful that I'm speechless when I think about it. So then this is where I started to create, even though I was creating these physical boundaries for myself and taking the space and honoring what I needed to begin to heal and move through this, there's those physical boundaries, but then there's also the other boundaries that we need to begin to put in place. And I realized that I was never really any good at putting boundaries in place. I was either too forceful or I was not at all. There was no way for me, or I had chosen not to find interestingly enough, I'm a Libra and we are very eloquent at these things, but I didn't know, or I didn't feel like, I don't even think that I knew how to put a boundary in place. Let's put it that way. Not in a way that was meaningful or effective. And, we toss around these words of boundaries. And at the end of the day, the simplest way that I like to understand what a boundary is. First of all, boundaries are not expectations that we put on other people, but they are simply guidelines of what I am willing to and not willing to accept. And that's the first thing. And that boundaries, as I relate to somebody recently in conversation, as I just said, boundaries are not meant to be a jail cell. Boundaries are simply guardrails, that we put around or within a relationship so that we can protect the integrity of what we are fostering, what we are growing. And so I think that if we begin to, instead of thinking about boundaries as these, I don't want to say hard and fast because they're important, but I think that sometimes people still confuse them with what of like expectations and rules and guidelines. So as we are in the month of love, I encourage you during the month of February to really use this time to like love yourself. If you're in a relationship, yes, love on your person. If you've got kids, love on your kids. If you've got pets, love on your pets. If you're an employer, love on your employees. But can we show up in a teeny tiny way today? First and foremost, loving ourselves. Do something for yourself today where you can love yourself. And then you will feel inspired to show a small love to someone else, someone outside of you. And are you still overfunctioning somewhere in your life out of fear? So on that note, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, please take care of yourself.
Thank you for listening to the Sacred Leadership Show. Sherisse returns Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, 9 Mountain, and 8 Pacific on the InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Until then, continue taking small steps today to be a leader in your life for the collective.